I was pulling into my driveway when I saw the bright orange envelope tucked into my door handle, and I already knew it was trouble. This was Huntsville, Alabama, February, and the Sunset Palms Residential Association had just mailed me a friendly reminder that my winter wreath violated community standards. I had moved here 6 months ago for a fresh start after a rough breakup and a hospitalization for anxiety. I service pools for a living, which sounds strange in the winter, but I handle chemical treatments and maintenance even in the off-season, and most of my clients are HOA communities. I understand the politics, the petty feuds, the little power trips. I thought that experience would protect me. I was wrong. The HOA here was new build aggressive. Identical lawns, identical mailboxes, and a board that sent violation notices like birthday cards. The wreath had been up since December. It was now the second week of February. I had forgotten about it. The notice said I had 72 hours to remove it, or face daily fines starting at $50. I stood there in my navy winter jacket and black knit beanie, auburn hair damp from the melting snow, staring at the letter. My hands were shaking, and not from the cold. The stakes were simple. I could not afford another breakdown. I needed stability, routine, predictability. The harassment was already making my chest tight every time I checked the mail. I pulled the wreath down that night. I took a picture with my phone to timestamp it. I figured that would be the end of it. 3 days later, I got another letter. Same orange envelope. This time it said the wreath had been removed late, and I owed a $100 late compliance fee. The letter was signed by Irene Pembroke, Rules Enforcement Chair. I had seen her around the neighborhood. Blonde pixie cut, black parka, cream earmuffs, always walking the perimeter with a clipboard. People called her Susan behind her back because she fit the stereotype so perfectly. The letter had a handwritten note at the bottom. It said, "I am going to make an example out of this." I read it twice. My stomach dropped. I knew what that meant. She was not enforcing a rule, she was targeting me. I called the management company. They told me to submit a written appeal within 10 business days. I asked if the late fee was real. They said it was at the discretion of the enforcement chair. I hung up and sat at my kitchen table for an hour, just breathing. The notice was still in my hand. I could feel the panic building again, the same slow squeeze that had landed me in the hospital 2 years ago. I could not let this spiral. I had to stay sharp. I started documenting everything. I printed the original wreath notice and the late fee letter. I took screenshots of my phone showing the exact date and time I removed the wreath. I checked the HOA covenants online. There was a section about seasonal decorations. It said they had to be removed within 2 weeks of the holiday. Valentine's Day was still 3 days away. The wreath had hearts on it. I could argue it was Valentine's decor. I typed up a short appeal and dropped it in the management company mailbox the next morning. I felt a little better. I thought I had covered my bases. Then the snow started. Huntsville does not get heavy snow often, but when it does, the whole city shuts down. By that afternoon, we had 4 inches and it was still coming. The plows were out on the main roads, but the subdivision streets were packed ice. I was shoveling my front walk when I saw Irene walking up the sidewalk with her clipboard. She was wearing the same black parka and cream earmuffs. She stopped at the end of my driveway. She looked at the walkway I had just cleared, then at the wreath hook still mounted on my door. She made a note. I leaned the shovel against the porch rail and walked down to meet her. I asked if there was a problem. She smiled. She said the wreath hook was a permanent fixture and required architectural approval. I told her it had been there when I moved in. She said that did not matter. She said I needed to submit a form and wait for board review. She said it could take 60 days. She said if I did not submit the form by the end of the week, she would add another violation. I stood there in the snow, breath fogging, trying to process. She turned and walked away before I could respond. I watched her make notes at 2 other houses. Both had wreath hooks. Neither got a violation tag. I went inside and pulled up the covenants again. I searched for anything about wreath hooks or door hardware. Nothing. The only mention of fixtures was for satellite dishes and exterior antennas. I took another screenshot. I emailed the management company and asked for the specific rule Irene was citing. They replied 2 days later. They said the board had broad authority to interpret aesthetic standards. They did not cite a rule number. I replied and asked for the form. They said it was under revision and would be available soon. That same evening, my doorbell camera caught Irene walking up my driveway with a handheld label maker. She pressed a little white label onto the handle of my snow shovel, which I had left leaning against the garage. The label said "Violation." She did the same to the bag of sidewalk salt I had sitting on the porch. I watched the footage 3 times. She labeled my snow equipment. I saved the video to 3 different places. I texted my neighbor across the street, a guy named Marcus who worked from home and saw everything. He replied with a thumbs up and said he had seen her do it. He said his drone footage from last week showed her doing the same thing to another house. I asked if he could send me the file. He said he would drop it off tomorrow. I sat back and stared at the ceiling. I was building a case, but I did not know what the endgame was yet. I just knew I could not let her push me out. The next violation notice arrived the following Monday. This one was typed, formal, and cited 4 separate issues. Unauthorized door hardware. Unapproved exterior storage, meaning the shovel and salt. Failure to maintain driveway snow clearance, even though I had shoveled twice that weekend. And a guest parking violation because my friend had parked in a visitor spot overnight during the storm. The notice said I had 10 days to remedy all items or the board would pursue remedies up to and including foreclosure. I read that line 3 times. Foreclosure. Over a wreath hook. I called an attorney that afternoon. She was an HOA specialist in Birmingham, about 90 minutes south. She listened to the whole story, asked for copies of everything, and told me 2 things. First, the foreclosure threat was legal theater. They could not foreclose over decoration violations without a long process and multiple hearings. Second, I should check if the management company was actually under contract. She said a lot of builder-appointed boards in new subdivisions never formalized the arrangement, and if the contract lapsed, the board had no enforcement power. I asked how I would find that out. She said the declaration should list the management agent, and the county clerk should have any amendments or renewals on file. She said if there was nothing on file, the threats were empty. I thanked her and hung up. I spent the rest of the evening on the county website. The subdivision declaration was from 2022. The management company was listed as the agent for 1 year, renewable annually by board vote. I found the 2023 renewal. I could not find anything for 2024 or 2025. I printed everything. I had my trump card. I was not ready to play it yet. I needed Irene to overreach one more time, on record, so the whole board would be implicated. The snow kept falling. We got another 2 inches that Wednesday night. I shoveled again Thursday morning before work. I checked my doorbell camera. Irene had walked past at 6 a.m. and taken a photo of my driveway with her phone. I went to work. When I got home that evening, there was a new letter. This one said my driveway snow removal was insufficient and posed a safety hazard. It included a photo, printed in color, showing a thin strip of packed snow along the edge of my driveway near the street. The photo was timestamped 6:14 a.m. before I had shoveled. The letter said I had 24 hours to clear all ice and snow to bare pavement or face a citation. It was signed by Irene. I looked at my driveway. It was clear. The packed strip she had photographed was gone. I took my own photo. I checked the county code. There was no requirement to clear driveways to bare pavement. The only snow removal rule was for public sidewalks, and I had done that. I typed another email to the management company. I attached both photos and asked what standard I was supposed to meet. No reply. I texted Marcus. He said Irene had been walking the neighborhood every morning with a camera and a tape measure. He said she was building files on 6 or 7 homeowners. He said his drone footage showed her measuring garbage can distances and photographing mailbox posts. I asked if he could send me everything. He said he would make a folder. I thanked him. I let her think I was cornered, because my trump card needed her to overreach. Friday morning, I got a call from the towing company. The dispatcher said my vehicle was flagged for removal due to expired guest parking. I told her I did not have a guest. She said the work order listed my truck. I asked who authorized it. She said the property management company. I asked for a name. She put me on hold. When she came back, she said the order came from the enforcement chair and they were dispatched to tow within 2 hours. I hung up and ran outside. My truck was in my own driveway. There was no guest parking sticker on it. There was no violation tag. I took 3 pictures from different angles. I called the management company. The line rang 15 times and went to voicemail. I called the towing company back. I told them the vehicle was in a private assigned spot and there was no violation. The dispatcher said she would note it, but the driver was already en route. I asked for the driver's number. She said she could not give that out. I said I would file a police report if they touched my truck. She said that was my right. She hung up. I stood in my driveway, shaking. The snow was falling again. The forecast said another 4 inches overnight. I needed my truck. I had a job in the morning. If they towed it, I would miss work and my boss would not be happy. I pulled out my phone and called Marcus. He answered on the first ring. I told him what was happening. He said he would be over in 5 minutes with his camera. Marcus showed up with a DSLR and a tripod. He set up on the sidewalk across the street and started filming my driveway. I asked what he was doing. He said if they tried to tow, we want it on video. I thanked him. We waited. 20 minutes later, a flatbed tow truck turned onto our street, moving slowly through the snow. It pulled up in front of my house. The driver got out. He was a big guy, maybe 50, wearing a reflective vest and a knit cap. He looked at my truck, then at a printout in his hand. He walked up to my door. I met him on the porch. He said he had a work order for this address. I asked to see it. He handed me the printout. It listed my address, my truck make and model, and the reason as unauthorized guest parking. I pointed at my driveway. I said that is my assigned spot. This is my truck. There is no guest. He scratched his head. He said the order came from the management company. I told him I had called and disputed it. I said if he hooked my truck, I would file charges. He looked at me, then at Marcus filming from across the street. He said he was just doing his job. I said I understood, but this was a mistake. He asked if I had proof. I showed him my phone. I had a screenshot of my lease rider showing the assigned parking spot number. I had photos of my registration and insurance showing the same address. He looked at them. He nodded slowly. He said he would call his dispatcher. He walked back to the truck and spent 5 minutes on the phone. When he came back, he said the dispatcher wanted to speak to the management company before proceeding. He said he would return if they confirmed. He got in the truck and drove off. Marcus packed up his camera. He said that was close. I agreed. I went inside and sat on the couch, heart pounding. I knew this was not over. Irene had tried to tow my truck based on a lie, and the driver had refused because I had proof. That was my first real win. But it told me how far she was willing to go. That weekend, I started going through the HOA financials. They were posted online, but the PDFs were scanned images, not searchable text. I printed them and highlighted every fee category. I cross-referenced them with the covenants. I found 3 fees that did not match any rule. One was called a compliance administration fee. One was called a standards review charge. One was called an enforcement processing cost. None of those terms appeared anywhere in the governing documents. I made a spreadsheet. I listed every fee, the rule citation, and whether it was valid. 3 out of 11 were bogus. I checked the ledger. The compliance administration fee had been charged to 14 homeowners in the past 6 months. That was $700 per household. I did the math. That was close to $10,000. I saved everything to a USB drive. I was about to close my laptop when I got a text from Marcus. He said, "Check your email." I opened my inbox. He had sent a Dropbox link. Inside were 6 drone clips from the past 2 months. Each one showed Irene walking the neighborhood with her clipboard and label maker. In one clip, she was labeling a trash can. In another, she was measuring the height of a mailbox post with a tape measure. In a third, she was photographing a car parked legally in a driveway. I downloaded all of it. I was starting to see the pattern. She was not enforcing rules. She was manufacturing violations to justify fees. And she was doing it systematically. Monday morning, I got another orange envelope. This one was different. It was a notice that my guest parking privileges were revoked pending a hearing. The hearing was scheduled for March 3rd, 3 weeks away. The notice said until then, any vehicle registered to me found in guest parking would be towed immediately. I read it twice. I did not use guest parking. My truck was always in my driveway. This was preemptive punishment for something I had not done. I called the management company again. This time, someone answered, a woman named Diane. I explained the situation. She said the enforcement chair had the authority to suspend privileges during an investigation. I asked what investigation. She said there was an open file about my parking compliance. I told her that was insane. She said I could appeal at the hearing. I asked if I could see the file. She said no. I asked who would be at the hearing. She said the board and the enforcement chair. I asked if I could bring a witness. She paused. She said the bylaws did not specifically allow witnesses, but I could bring documentation. I thanked her and hung up. I knew what this was. Irene was isolating me, cutting off my access, building a paper trail that made me look like a problem tenant. The hearing was 3 weeks out, but the parking pass revocation was immediate. And the forecast said another winter storm was rolling in this weekend. If I could not park in guest overflow during the storm, my truck would be on the street, and the plows would bury it or the city would ticket it. The time pressure was real. I decided to test something. I printed the county clerk documents showing no management contract renewal for 2024 or 2025. I put them in a folder but left it at home. I wanted to see how far Irene would push before I revealed it. That Thursday, I got a certified letter. It was a notice of intent to file a small claims action for unpaid fees. The amount listed was $350, compliance administration fee, standards review charge, late removal penalty, and enforcement processing cost. I had disputed all of them. The letter said if I did not pay within 7 days, the HOA would file in district court and seek attorney fees and costs. I read the signature line. It was signed by the board president, a man I had never met. But the return address was Irene's personal email. I called my attorney in Birmingham. I told her about the fees and the missing contract. She said if the management company was not under contract, the board could not delegate enforcement, and any fees they imposed were void. She said I should show up at the hearing with the county docs and demand they prove the contract was valid. She said if they could not, their entire fee structure collapsed. I asked if that would stop the small claims filing. She said yes, because they would have no standing. I thanked her. I felt a spark of hope for the first time in weeks. But I knew Irene was not going to back down quietly. She had already said she would make an example out of this. I had to be ready for her next move. The storm hit Friday night. 6 inches of heavy wet snow. The power flickered twice but stayed on. I shoveled my walk Saturday morning and cleared my driveway. I checked the camera. Irene had not come by yet. I went inside and made coffee. An hour later, my phone buzzed. It was a neighborhood app notification. Irene had posted a public message. It said several homeowners were not maintaining safe sidewalks and the board was considering mandatory snow removal contracts at owner expense. My address was not listed, but I knew it was aimed at me. I screenshot the post. I replied publicly and said I had cleared my walk twice and provided photos if anyone wanted proof. 3 neighbors liked my comment. One replied and said they had the same problem, constant complaints no matter what they did. I felt a little less alone. Then my doorbell rang. I opened it. Irene was standing there with a man I did not recognize. He was older, maybe 60, wearing a green parka and a Sunset Palms polo under it. Irene introduced him as the board president, William. She said they were here to discuss my compliance record. I asked if this was the hearing. William said no, this was an informal check-in. I asked if I could record it. Irene's face went tight. She said that would not be necessary. I said I preferred to have a record. William said that was fine. I pulled out my phone and started a voice memo. Irene did not like it, but she did not leave. William started by saying the board appreciated homeowners who followed the rules. He said there had been concerns about my property. I asked what concerns. Irene jumped in. She said the wreath, the hook, the parking, the snow removal, all of it showed a pattern of disregard. I said I had photos proving I complied with everything. She said photos could be edited. I blinked. I asked if she was accusing me of faking evidence. She said doorbell cameras were not reliable because they could be tampered with. I pointed at the camera above my door. I said it has a snow cap on it, you can see it has not been touched. She said that proved nothing. William cleared his throat. He said the board was considering a formal complaint process. I asked what that meant. He said it meant I would be required to submit weekly compliance reports with time-stamped photos, reviewed by the enforcement chair. I asked if that applied to everyone. He said no, just properties under review. I asked how I got put under review. Irene said it was her discretion. I looked at William. I asked if he agreed with this. He said the board supported the enforcement chair. I nodded slowly. I said I would see them at the hearing. Irene smiled. She said, "I will call your employer if I have to." I stopped. I looked at her. I said, "Excuse me." She repeated it. She said, "If you do not comply, I will contact your employer and inform them you are under HOA investigation." I felt my chest tighten. I kept my voice steady. I said, "That sounds like harassment." She said it was transparency. William looked uncomfortable. He said they should go. They left. I closed the door and leaned against it. My hands were shaking again. That line, "I will call your employer if I have to," was on tape. I had her. I spent the rest of the weekend organizing everything. I made a binder. Tab 1, all notices and letters, in order. Tab 2, photos and timestamps proving compliance. Tab 3, the county clerk docs showing no valid management contract. Tab 4, Marcus's drone footage and my doorbell clips. Tab 5, the HOA ledger showing bogus fees. Tab 6, the recording of Irene threatening to call my employer. I practiced my presentation. I timed it. 8 minutes. I wanted it tight and factual. I was not going to yell or argue. I was just going to lay it out and let the documents do the work. On Monday, I got another letter. This one was from a law firm in Birmingham. It was a demand letter for the $350 plus a $100 administrative fee plus attorney costs of $200. Total, $650. The letter said I had 5 days to pay or they would file. I read the signature. It was a lawyer I had never heard of. I Googled the firm. They did not specialize in HOA law. They were a general practice with a website that looked like it was built in 2003. I called my attorney. She laughed. She said this is a bluff. They are not going to file over $600, and if they do, we will counterclaim for harassment and abuse of process. She said bring everything to the hearing and do not pay a dime. I felt better. But the 5-day deadline was real, and I knew Irene would use it as another escalation if I ignored it. That Tuesday, I came home to find a new label on my mailbox post. It said "not compliant" in neat block letters. I peeled it off and photographed it. I checked the camera. Irene had applied it at 4:47 p.m., less than an hour ago. I texted Marcus. He replied immediately. He said she just hit 4 mailboxes on our block. I asked if he had it on drone footage. He said yes, uploading now. I went back inside. I was about to make dinner when my phone rang. Unknown number. I answered. It was Diane from the management company. She said the board had voted to lock my access to the community amenities pending the outcome of the hearing. I asked what amenities. She said the pool, the gym, the clubhouse, and the mailroom. I said the mailroom is where I get my mail. She said I could arrange pickup at the management office. I asked where that was. She said Decatur, 30 minutes north. I asked when this took effect. She said immediately. I asked if this was legal. She said it was an interim safety measure. I said safety from what? She paused. She said the board had concerns about disruptive behavior. I asked for an example. She said she could not discuss it. I said this is retaliation. She said I could address it at the hearing. She hung up. I stood there, phone in hand, trying not to scream. They had just locked me out of the mailroom. I would have to drive 30 minutes each way to pick up my mail. And the hearing was still 2 weeks out. This was the escalation I had been expecting. I needed to move faster. I went to the clubhouse the next morning to test the lockout. The main door had a keypad. I entered my code. Red light. Access denied. I tried again. Same result. I walked around to the side entrance. Same keypad, same red light. I took a photo of the keypad screen. I noticed someone watching from a window inside. I waved. They did not wave back. I walked back to my truck. Irene was standing by the mailbox cluster 50 feet away watching me. She had her phone out. She was filming. I walked over. I asked if she was recording me. She said she was documenting a lockout compliance check. I said I was not doing anything wrong. She said I was attempting to access a restricted facility. I said my code was deactivated without notice. She said the notice was the letter from Diane. I said that letter came after the lockout. She smiled. She said the board acts in real time to protect the community. I asked what I was being protected from. She said that was under review. I stood there, snow falling around us, trying to stay calm. I said this is harassment. She said, I am going to make an example out of this. Same line, second time. I nodded. I said okay. I walked back to my truck. I did not argue. I did not yell. I just got in and drove home. I had her on camera saying it again. I had the lockout documented. I had the timeline proving they acted without notice. I was building the case brick by brick. The following week, I got a text from a neighbor I barely knew. Her name was Angela. She lived 2 streets over. She said she heard I was fighting the HOA and she wanted to help. I asked how she knew. She said Marcus told her. I asked what kind of help. She said she was on the architecture committee and she had access to the board's shared drive. She said there was a spreadsheet. She said I should see it. We met at a coffee shop in town that evening. She brought her laptop. She opened a file called Enforcement Priority List. It was a spreadsheet with about 30 rows. Each row had a homeowner name, address, and a column called Action Plan. My name was on row 4. The action plan said escalate to daily fines, revoke amenities, coordinate with legal. I stared at the screen. I asked when this was created. She said November. 2 months before the wreath notice. I asked if she could send me a copy. She said she already had. She said check your email. I looked at her. I asked why she was helping. She said because her name was on the list too, row 12, and she was tired of being bullied. I thanked her. I went home and printed the spreadsheet. I added it to the binder. This was the twist I needed. The board was not responding to violations. They were targeting specific homeowners and inventing violations to justify it. I had proof. I had the missing contract. I had the bogus fees. I had the drone footage. I had the recordings. I had everything. I just needed the right moment to deploy it. The hearing was now 10 days away. I got another letter. This one said my driveway snow removal was still insufficient and I was being fined $50 per day starting immediately. I took photos. My driveway was clear. The letter included a photo showing a patch of ice near my garage. I checked the timestamp. The photo was taken at 5:30 a.m. I went outside. There was no ice. I poured a little water on the spot and waited. It froze in about 20 minutes. I realized what she was doing. She was creating the violation, photographing it, then sending the notice. I could not prove it, but the timeline was suspicious. I added the letter to the binder. I checked my bank account. If the fines were real, I would owe $500 by the hearing date. I could not afford that. I called my attorney. She said do not pay anything, bring the contract docs, and force them to prove they have authority. She said if they cannot prove the management company is under contract, every fee and fine is void. I asked what happened if they did have a contract I had not found. She said then we argue selective enforcement and use the target list. She said either way, you have leverage. I hung up. I felt a little steadier. But the fines were still accumulating on paper, and I knew Irene would use that to justify more drastic action. That Saturday, I was shoveling the front walk again when a car pulled up. It was a sedan with a magnetic sign that said Sunset Palms Management. A woman got out. She was young, maybe late 20s, holding a tablet. She introduced herself as Kelly, the new compliance inspector. I said I did not know we had one. She said the board just created the position. She said she was here to do a site check. I asked if I had to let her on my property. She said it was in the covenants. I asked for the section number. She looked at her tablet. She scrolled. She said she would have to get back to me on that. I said okay, then I am not consenting to a search. She looked surprised. She said it was not a search, just a walkthrough. I said same thing. She said she would note my refusal. I said please do. She got back in her car and left. I went inside and checked the covenants. There was no compliance inspector role. There was no provision for site inspections. I screenshot the table of contents and the relevant sections. I emailed them to my attorney with a note. She replied within an hour. She said this is getting into harassment territory, document everything, and consider filing a restraining order if it continues. I did not want to go that far yet, but I saved her email. The weekend passed quietly, too quietly. I knew something was coming. Monday morning, I woke up to find my driveway blocked. Someone had pushed a snowbank across the entrance during the night. It was not natural. The plow had gone down the street, but this was a deliberate pile, about 3 feet high, packed hard. I checked the camera. The footage showed a small plow truck with no markings pushing snow into my driveway at 2018 a.m. I could not see a plate. I could not see a driver. I screenshot the clip and sent it to Marcus. He called me 5 minutes later. He said his camera caught the same truck doing it to 2 other houses on the target list. He said it was a contract plow the HOA hired. I asked how he knew. He said he recognized the truck from the amenity lot. I thanked him. I grabbed my shovel and started clearing the berm. It took me 40 minutes. My back was screaming by the time I finished. I was late for work. I called my boss and explained. He was not happy, but he understood. I got to the job site an hour behind schedule. When I got home that night, there was another orange envelope. This one said I had created a safety hazard by piling snow in the street right-of-way. The photo showed the berm I had shoveled onto the curb strip. I looked at the street. The snow was gone. The city plow had cleared it that afternoon. I took another photo showing the clear curb. I added everything to the binder. I was now at 18 documents. The hearing was in 6 days. Wednesday afternoon, I got a call from the towing company again. Different dispatcher. She said they had a new work order for my vehicle. Same address, same truck. I said we went through this already. She said this order was for code enforcement, not guest parking. I asked what code. She said, obstructing snow removal equipment. I said that is insane, my truck is in my driveway. She said the work order listed the street in front of my house. I looked out the window. My truck was in the driveway. There was nothing on the street. I told her that. She said she would send the driver to verify. I said if he shows up, I am calling the police. She said that was my right. I hung up and immediately called the non-emergency police line. I explained the situation. The dispatcher said if the truck was legally parked and not blocking a hydrant or a plow route, they could not tow it without a city citation. She said if the tow company showed up, I should call back and an officer would respond. I thanked her. I went outside and moved my truck further up the driveway, tight against the garage door. I took a photo showing the entire driveway, the street, and the house number. I texted it to Marcus and Angela. Angela replied and said the board had a meeting tonight and I was not on the agenda, but my property was listed under enforcement actions. She said she would try to record it. I told her to be careful. She said she was done being careful. Thursday morning, Angela sent me a voice memo. It was 40 minutes long. She said it was the board meeting. I listened to the whole thing on my drive to work. Most of it was boring budget talk. Then I heard Irene's voice. She said there were several properties requiring escalated enforcement. She listed my address. She said the owner had refused a compliance inspection, failed to clear snow properly, and made threatening statements to board members. William asked what kind of threats. Irene said the owner had implied he would sue. Another board member, a woman I did not recognize, said that was his right. Irene said it was intimidation. The woman pushed back. She said we need to be careful, this could look like retaliation. Irene raised her voice. She said she had documentation of everything. William said they would discuss it in executive session. The recording cut off. I replayed the last part 3 times. One board member was pushing back. That was good. But Irene was still in control. I needed to break that control at the hearing. I had 4 days left. I sent Angela a thank you text. She replied with a warning. She said Irene was planning something big for the hearing. She did not know what. She said, be ready. Friday night, the second big storm hit. The forecast had been calling for it all week. 8 inches, heavy and wet, starting after midnight. I went to bed early. I woke up at 3 a.m. to my phone buzzing. It was a tornado warning. I checked the weather app. Not a tornado, just high winds and thunder snow. I looked out the window. The snow was coming down sideways. I could barely see the street. I went back to bed. When I woke up at 7, the world was buried. My driveway had a 2-foot drift. The street was impassable. I checked my phone. The HOA had sent an emergency email. It said all homeowners were required to clear their walks and driveways by noon or face emergency fines of $100 per hour. I read it again. $100 per hour. I looked outside. There was no way I could clear that much snow in 5 hours. I did not even own a snowblower. I grabbed my shovel and started. By 9, I had cleared about a third of the driveway. My shoulders were burning. I took a break. I checked the camera. Irene had walked past at 8:40 and taken photos. I went back out. I kept shoveling. By 11, I was almost done. I had a narrow path from the garage to the street. It was not perfect, but it was passable. I checked the time. 1 hour to spare. I went inside to warm up. At 11:50, my doorbell rang. I opened it. Irene was standing there with Kelly, the compliance inspector. Irene said they were doing a visual check. I said I cleared the driveway. She said it was not to standard. I asked what standard. She pointed at the edges. She said there was still packed snow along the sides. I said that is overflow from the plow. She said it counted as my responsibility. I said, show me the rule. Kelly held up her tablet. She said the emergency declaration gave the board discretion to define adequate clearance. I said that is not a rule. That is a blank check. Irene smiled. She said the fine starts at noon. I looked at my watch. It was 11,058. I said, you are doing this on purpose. She said, I am doing my job. I said, I want this on record. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Irene did not flinch. She repeated, I am going to make an example out of this. I nodded. I said, great, say it again. She did. Word for word. Kelly looked uncomfortable. I asked if she was okay with this. Kelly said she was just following board direction. I said, you are witnessing harassment. Irene said the only harassment here is your refusal to comply. I stopped recording. I said, I will see you at the hearing. I walked inside and closed the door. I leaned against it, breathing hard. I had her saying the example line twice on tape now, in 2 separate encounters. I had the lockout. I had the manufactured emergency fine. I had everything. The hearing was in 2 days. Saturday, I finalized the binder. I printed new tabs. I added the emergency fine notice and the recording of Irene repeating her catchphrase. I added the target list Angela had sent. I added the timeline showing the lockout happened before any notice was delivered. I rehearsed my presentation again. I kept it under 10 minutes. I made sure every claim had a document to back it up. I was ready. That evening, Angela texted me. She said the board had called an emergency executive session for Sunday morning. She said Irene was pushing to accelerate my hearing to Monday, 1 day early, to avoid giving me time to prepare. She said 2 board members were uncomfortable, but William was siding with Irene. She said, watch your back. I thanked her. I stayed up late organizing. I printed extra copies of the key docs. I put them in a second folder. If they moved the hearing up, I would be ready. Sunday morning, I got the email. The hearing was rescheduled to Monday at 6 p.m. at the clubhouse. I was given 4 hours notice instead of the required 72. I screenshot the email. I replied and said I would be there. I spent the rest of the day going over every detail. I was not going to let them catch me off guard. Monday at 5:45 p.m., I drove to the clubhouse. The parking lot was half full. I recognized a few cars. I parked and grabbed my binder. The snow was still piled high on both sides of the walk. I went to the front door. The keypad still showed red when I tried my code. I knocked. William opened it. He said, come in. The meeting room was set up with a long table at the front and folding chairs in rows. The board was sitting at the table. Irene, William, and 2 others I did not know. There were about 10 homeowners in the chairs. I recognized Marcus and Angela. I sat in the front row. William called the meeting to order. He said we were here to review a compliance matter. He said I would have 10 minutes to present my side, then the board would ask questions, then they would vote. I said I understood. Irene went first. She stood and pulled out a folder. She said I had a history of non-compliance dating back to December. She listed the wreath, the hook, the parking, the snow removal, the inspection refusal, the emergency fine. She said I had been uncooperative and hostile. She said the board had tried to work with me, but I had refused every remedy. She said the total fines and fees now exceeded $1,000. She said if I did not pay by the end of the week, the board would file a lien. She sat down. William asked if I wanted to respond. I stood. I opened my binder. I started with the timeline. I showed the wreath notice and the photo proving I removed it on time. I showed the late fee letter and explained there was no rule allowing late fees for timely compliance. I showed the parking pass revocation and the recording of the tow truck driver refusing to tow because I had proof of assigned parking. I showed the lockout notice and the photos proving I was locked out before any warning was sent. I showed the emergency snow fine and the recording of Irene saying she was making an example out of me. I showed the target list with my name and 29 others. I showed the HOA ledger with 3 bogus fee categories that did not appear in the covenants. I showed the drone footage of Irene labeling shovels and mailboxes with her label maker. I showed the county clerk documents proving the management company contract had not been renewed since 2023. I stopped. I looked at William. I said if the management company is not under contract, this board has no authority to impose fines, suspend amenities, or delegate enforcement. I said every fee you have charged in the past 2 years is void. The room went silent. William looked at Irene. Irene looked at the documents. She said those are public records, they do not prove anything. I said they prove you have been operating without a valid contract for 18 months. She said the board has inherent authority under the declaration. I said show me where. She did not answer. One of the other board members, a man in his 50s, said we need to verify this. William said we will take it under advisement. I said I want to vote tonight. Irene stood up. She said this is a stall tactic. She said, I will call your employer, if I have to. I smiled. I pulled out my phone. I played the recording of her saying that exact line 2 weeks ago on my porch. Then I played the recording from the mailbox confrontation where she said it again. The room was dead quiet. I said that is witness intimidation and harassment. I said I have 2 recordings, 3 witnesses, and a paper trail showing targeted enforcement. I looked at William. I said vote, or I file a complaint with the county tomorrow. William looked at the other board members. The woman who had pushed back during the meeting said she wanted to see the county documents. I handed her the folder. She read them. She passed them to the man next to her. He read them. He looked at William. He said if this is accurate, we have a problem. William said we need to consult with our attorney. Irene said we do not need an attorney, we need to enforce the rules. The woman said what rules, Irene? If we do not have a contract, we have been acting outside our authority. Irene stood up. She said I have spent 2 years building a compliance system, and I am not going to let one difficult owner dismantle it. I said you built a shakedown system. I said you targeted people, invented violations, and charged fees that do not exist. I said I have proof. I held up the target list. I said this is your enforcement priority list. I said it has 30 names on it. I said you were not responding to violations, you were creating them. Marcus stood up from the back. He said I have drone footage showing her labeling property without cause. Angela stood up. She said I have board emails discussing revenue targets from fines. I said this is not about rules, this is about money. Irene's face was bright red. She said you are all lying. I said then let's vote. William looked defeated. He said all in favor of suspending enforcement actions pending a contract review. The woman raised her hand. The man raised his hand. William raised his hand slowly. Irene did not move. William said motion carries 3-1. I felt my shoulders drop. It was over. Irene grabbed her folder and walked out. The door slammed behind her. William said the board would conduct an internal audit and report back within 30 days. I said I want all fines and fees voided in writing. He nodded. He said we will send a letter. I thanked him. I walked out. 2 weeks later, I got a certified letter from a law firm in Huntsville, not the bluff firm from before, a real one. The letter said the Sunset Palms Board had initiated an internal audit and discovered irregularities in the fee structure and enforcement records. It said the board had voted to void all fines and fees imposed under the 2024-2025 compliance program. It said the management company contract had been formally terminated. It said the board was conducting an investigation into possible misuse of funds and would cooperate with any regulatory or law enforcement inquiries. It did not mention Irene by name, but I knew what it meant. I called Angela. She said Irene resigned from the board the day after the hearing. She said the audit found about $30,000 in fees that were not authorized by the covenants. She said the board had referred it to the county district attorney. She said there might be fraud charges. I asked if I was safe. She said yes, the new interim enforcement chair was a retired school teacher who just wanted to keep the lights on and the snow plowed. She said the target list had been deleted and the whole compliance program was suspended. I thanked her. I hung up and sat on my couch. I looked around my little townhouse. The wreath hook was still on the door. I had not taken it down. I was not going to. I had moved here for a fresh start, and I almost lost it because one person decided to make an example out of me. But I had kept my head. I had documented everything. I had found allies. I had kept my trump card hidden until the perfect moment. And when Irene repeated her threat one last time, on record, in front of witnesses, I had dropped the evidence packet and watched the whole house of cards collapse. March came in warmer. The snow melted. The neighborhood went quiet. I still saw Marcus and Angela around. We waved. We did not talk about it much. It was over. I got a letter from the district attorney's office in April asking if I would be willing to provide a statement. I said yes. I gave them copies of everything. They said the investigation was ongoing. I never heard what happened to Irene. I assumed she moved or settled quietly. I did not care. I kept working. I kept my head down. The new board sent a newsletter in May apologizing for the previous administration's overreach. They said they were reviewing all enforcement actions from the past 2 years and would issue refunds where appropriate. I got a check for $400 covering the fees I had refused to pay. I cashed it. I used it to buy a snowblower for next winter. I was not going through that again. The HOA is still around. They still send reminders about trash cans and lawn height. But they are reasonable now. They follow the actual rules. And every time I see a wreath hook on a neighbor's door, I smile. Because I know what it costs to keep mine.